What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And I don't always talk about prison and gangs and streets and that sort of thing on this channel. It's a topic, right? It's part of my experience, but also try to bring you guys, my views on current events, politics, faith, and interviews, and the law, and history, you name it, right? Culture. And so I had a different video for today, right, about the origins of C-14, and I'll drop that later in the week. But that started in the 80s, and this right here, welcome to Atlanta, boy. We don't play. This was last night, and it's getting a lot of news coverage, but there's a story there, and so I thought I'd kind of break it down for you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Join the conversation, of course. So what's going on? Why is everybody going ham over this area, right? This forest in Atlanta, and it's because of this thing called Cop City, right? They call it Cop City. The real name is the Atlanta Public Safety Center. Uh, and how did this come about? What is Cop City? Was the issue? So on the outskirts of Atlanta, there's this forest, not a park, a forest, right? Like 1,000 acre forest called South River Forest. It used to be called the Wilani Forest. That's what the Muskegees called it before the land was taken from them. Like land was taken from all natives. And so some people still call it that. But either way, there's this forest. And the forest had been pretty much ignored for a long time, right? It was taken from the natives. It was used as a prison farm for captured runaway slaves. So there's history there, but for the most part, it's left unattended now. Right? It's just a forest. It's got little clearings and stuff or whatever. And so in 2021, we'll kind of get to the details of it, but the mayor, right, Keisha Bottoms was the mayor at the time, and the city council approved this thing called the Atlanta Public Safety Center. And it's 85 acres of buildings set out over like 100 or 200 acres of the forest. And within that, they're building like a little village, a little shop, a house, that sort of thing, where they can practice, according to city government officials, right, where they can practice high-speed chases, shootouts, urban policing. The firefighters are going to be there practicing how to drive trucks in an urban environment, I guess, and put out fires. There's an auditorium, there's classrooms. It's a state-of-the-art policing facility. There's also a part connected to that or close to that, which this movie producer is saying that he owns part of the land, right? That's in court. It's kind of a whole separate thing. I won't get into it. But nonetheless, they're going to change the face of this forest, right? And that's a problem for a lot of people for kind of, I think, obvious reasons. But it's a little more interesting because just a few years before that, the Atlanta City Council had adopted as a part of their charter, and government officials were very on board with the idea of we're going to preserve this area. We're going to preserve this forest. It's a blessing to have it. We're going to maintain it, make it a little bit nicer, not really build on it. We're going to create a park, right? A grassy area that's nice and up to date. But this is huge in our fight against climate change and blah, blah, blah. So we're, this is going to be a historic piece of property that's going to be left unmessed with. And surrounding communities, mostly Black, mostly low income, was pretty happy about that, because in the area around the park, there's 6 toxic waste dumps, 5 prisons, 2 demolished housing projects, like all kinds of stuff. And historically, undesirable things are built in the hood, right? Like power plants and that sort of thing. So this was an example of, okay, all this undesirable stuff is around, but at least we're not going to mess up this, and everybody was on board with it. 2020 happens, right? George Floyd is killed. There's somebody killed in Atlanta by the police. Uprisings all over the country, in all kinds of cities about this relationship between the police and low-income communities of color or people of color in general. And so Atlanta has hella protests. It's cracking over there, right? All the time. 2021, here comes the mayor and the city council, and they say, you know what? We're going to build this $90 million facility, this state-of-the-art policing facility. and it's going to help us address this crime wave, right? And also, with international partners and national partners. But above all, it's going to boost the morale of the Atlanta Police Department, right? Because our local cops are feeling kind of discouraged by their jobs because of all the stuff that's been happening. They're kind of bummed. And so we're going to build them this big old playground. And that's going to make them feel like they're more welcome, like we value and appreciate them. And so that's not going over well, right? That is not the popular narrative in terms of city governments, and especially in a place like Atlanta. And so folks are pissed. They protest. 70% of the comments, or the public comments during the hearings, are against it. A wide range of people are against it, right? Environmentalists are against it because all the trees, they're going to cut down trees. People that are critical of law enforcement are obviously against it. People that are critical of the militarization of the police department are against it. People that are against kind of corporate dollars infringing on public spaces are against it, right? And yet it passes, right? Overwhelmingly, it passes. And right after it passes, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is the largest media outlet really in the area, right? Largest newspaper, but they can really kind of create and control a narrative in that region. They're a big deal. They start releasing op-eds and articles saying that anybody protesting Cop City is a terrorist, right? They're all terrorists. And that word is meaningful for a couple of reasons. One is it's just inflammatory, right? Like it's a exceptional word, right? And especially at this time, nothing really wild had kicked off over there. Now, some wild stuff has happened since, but at this time, nothing really wild had jumped off, right? People were complaining, people were going to sleep in trees, that kind of stuff. That was about it. And then whatchamacallit? The domestic terrorism law, had been adopted in Georgia not long before this, in response to, you guys remember that the white supremacist kid went inside the black church, like did Bible study with him and then killed them all. So after that happened, there was protests in Atlanta as well, just like all over the country. And so in response to that, Georgia passed this domestic terrorism law. But their domestic terrorism law is a big deal, right? Like it carries up to like 35 years in prison. It's not a small thing. There's not really bail, right? You can get bail. Bail's pretty damn expensive for that charge. And you're going to sit down and do some time, right? So calling all these people terrorists is kind of invoking that, And sure enough, then the governor and everybody jumps on board, and all of a sudden they're all terrorists. And so that comes into play because there's been a lot of people since that have been charged with domestic terrorism, right? So starting in December of last year, a handful of people are arrested. They're charged with domestic terrorism, that sort of thing. So they're facing 35 years in the joint. And it's getting activists more active. Now it becomes a tit for tat. You know what I mean? And so January 18th, a big thing happens. January of this year. This dude, an environmental activist, aka a forest defender, right, was killed. Right, the cops had come in like 9 a.m. A bunch of different law enforcement agencies, state troopers and whatnot, came in and they were clearing out these quote unquote forest defenders, who essentially were there camping in the trees, like you're not going to cut down this area, right? And they were doing graffiti and they were vandalizing the construction site and that sort of stuff too, right? But that was their gig. And there wasn't a ton of them. But so cops come in to clear them out. And this youngster, 26-year-old Esteban Paez Deran, also known as Tortuguita, right, Little Turtle, was shot at least 13 times by multiple state troopers, according to the autopsy report. And it is said that he was shot because he pulled a gun first and shot a state trooper in the stomach. Now, a state trooper lived, he was fine. But Tortuguita did not, right? He died. And so his family, they're from Venezuela. They're like, man, this dude was a pacifist. There's actually an interview that he did some months prior where he was advocating on the side of the indigenous folks that are against this. There's also indigenous people against it, right? Like I said, it's a hodgepodge of different groups. And so he actually came out and said, look, at a previous thing, they had burned a car. Anarchists, it's a big thing to like burn cars and use those as barriers in exchanges with law enforcement, right? So they had burned up a car and left it there in the park, and he was like, man, the natives, the Muskogees and us, we ain't really for that. It's not a good look to have this burning car in our park, right? This is sacred land in the sense of we value the land. We're here to defend the land. You don't just leave a burning car on the land. Like, this shit don't belong. And had actually referred to a lot of the anarchists, right, as quote unquote rowdy gringos. And he's like, they're just full blown anarchists. I don't even know how you come to a civil discourse with that. But so be it. They're out here sleeping in the trees too. So it is what it is. But he wasn't really on the same page as some of the more violent folks. And you see that in a lot of a lot of protests, a lot of gatherings that bring in people of different interests. There's that fringe group. And a lot of times lately, and a lot of the police brutality stuff, I'm just gonna keep it real, it was fringe white groups that identify as anarchists that just see any opportunity to clash with police. They're just like F the government, right? Regardless of what issue brings people there. And it does take away from some of the other messages. That's a whole other subject. But nonetheless, so they're getting into it, right? So he gets killed. Man, a youngster gets killed. First time in the nation's history that an environmental activist is killed by police, right? Police come out with body cam footage. The body cam footage doesn't show what happens. It's like cops that aren't really there, but you can hear gunshots in the background. And then the cops are on the radio. And what's weird is the cops are like, oh, is that friendly fire? Oh, what was that? Was that us shooting us? And somebody's like, no, the first shot was very muffled, right? Saying like, oh, the first shot was from a different kind of gun. And they're like, oh, here's the picture of the gun that we found this kid with. But the gun is not muzzled in any way. And, so they said, this is what we found. And he bought this gun, right? They can't really connect the dots, but supposedly he bought the gun. So who knows what really happened? They haven't come out with a full report, though everybody promised an investigation. We know how that story goes. But so then there's hella protests, right? More protests. Now they're burning down cop cars in downtown Atlanta, like they're shooting fireworks and rocks at this big office building where the Atlanta Police Foundation is at. And Governor Kemp, right, conservative dude, declares a state of emergency, and so there's more to come in the sense of these domestic terrorism stuff. People are arrested then, charged with domestic terrorism. That's happening fairly frequently, right, as time goes on. So this is just like, January, late January, that this stuff happens. And the reason the Atlanta Police Foundation is being targeted so much is they're paying $60 million of the $90 million bill, right, for this, which we know is going to be more than that. But $30 million for taxpayers, $60 million for Atlanta Police Foundation. And a quick note, and this might deserve its own video, but for those that are unaware of how these police foundations work, so police departments have a budget, right? The city, the county, whatever, provides a budget for them. Beyond that budget, you have these police foundations. And these police foundations are executive boards, and they raise money for police departments. But where that money comes from is less noticeable, right? Is you got to trace it a little bit. And what that money is spent on is really no accountability. See, when the police spend money that they get from public budgets, right, then they have to show how they spend that money. And there's groups of people that go in and they analyze that stuff and they critique this stuff. Well, this is just like a pot of play money for police departments. Oftentimes, that's what they use to get the militarized equipment. That's what they do to do all kinds of things. And there's not really any oversight. So a lot of people are in the movement to at least reform policing in this country. They're very critical of these. And the Atlanta Police Foundation is very well funded by all kinds of companies, man. UPS, McDonald's, Wells Fargo, Chick-fil-A, Waffle House, colleges, all sorts of big money areas. One of their primary folks is also the owner of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. That's the paper, remember, that came out saying that all these people were terrorists before anything really had happened, right? So it's this interplay, and that brings in more interest groups, right? People, like I said, that are against the corporate dollars influence in these things, and view it as a class issue, right? Where less of a race issue, right, and more of a class issue, because you have white elite and black elite in Atlanta that want the same thing, right? They're all kind of hyper capitalists. It's the dollar, and they can really give a shit about all this other stuff. So, but it's a very racially polarized city. So, anyways, there's more protests. Fast forward to what happens right now. They organized this whole Stop Cop City week, and it was publicized, right? They publicized it. It was a whole week of action in which there was going to be speakers and workshops and various forms of direct action, press conferences, the whole nine, right? And so they've been raising money for this, grassroots folks and everything else. And again, it was well planned, right? And it started with a music festival this weekend. That was supposed to be the start. So at this music festival, there's like 500 people there, right? I don't know what kind of music, whatever folks like that listen to. But some music festival in this clearing by RC Fields. And out of that group, like 100, a sizable group of people, not 10 or 20, a decent group of people who identified as the forest defenders, walked off. And truth be told, they were anarchists. Like, let's just keep it real. But they walked off to do the largest march through that forest that has happened yet in all of these protests and in all this, hanging out at the forest and sleeping in trees and stuff and marches. And so this is the largest march yet. And it's almost sundown, right? It's not quite nighttime. It's almost sundown. They go marching off. Well, there's this depot that right behind me, where cops had set up to do surveillance on the protesters, right? On the Stop Cop City folks. Cops had set up at this little energy depot to observe and watch. There was helicopters. The cops ain't stupid. They know what's going on. They know there's going to be this week of action. It's all over online in those activist circles, right? They know what's been happening so far, right? They know that these cats come and they want that smoke. And so they're ready and they're watching. So these fools rush up and they start throwing fireworks, like fireworks, not sparklers and bottle rockets, fireworks, and Molotov cocktails and big ass rocks. And they basically rush the entrance they rush the cops. The cops retreat back to the construction site because Cop City's not built yet, right? But it's a construction site. They retreat back to the construction site. These dudes keep advancing, right? The protesters, rioters, anarchists, whatever you want to call them. And then the cavalry comes, right? Now cops have come from, and they rush. But before that happens, they burned up some vehicles, which they had done before, right? They burned some construction vehicles. They burned some police vehicles. No cops were injured, even though, it's being said that they feared for their lives and stuff, but no cops were hurt. But they were rushed. They got rushed, and they got a little wake-up call, and they rushed back, right? And so now you got, ATVs and SWAT vehicles and heavily armed police officers mobbing, and these cats go running through the forest. But the cops come after them, right? Now you got multiple helicopters. It's a raid on a forest, right? So they're shooting tear gas, everything else. People are getting choked out. They're snatching people up. These people were running back towards the concert. The concert is still ongoing. And so now they're rushing people at the concert, holding people like, you can't leave. You're all going to be charged with domestic terrorism. People are scared. Now protesters are yelling like, man, we have kids. What you doing? Why you getting all pissed off? And so eventually some people are allowed to leave in their cars. Like a bus is brought in to bring out those that didn't have their cars. They left under police escort, right? To get out of there. And like 35 plus people were detained. I think close to 2 dozen of them are arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. And these are going to be prosecuted, right? And think about what's been going on in Atlanta in terms of their district attorney and in terms of law enforcement, right? And just with the rap stuff and YSL, and dude, that lady is not playing. And this is going to be no exception. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens legally. But these people are going to do some time, some of them at least, right? And I don't know how well cops are going to be able to link specific people to specific actions, but based on what I'm seeing online, there's a lot of footage. There's footage from people that were on the side of the protesters. There's surveillance footage from the construction scene and cops. There's going to be body camera footage from cops. There's just media that was there, following it that have footage. And so it's going to be interesting how it unfolds. But there you go, man. It's Stop Cop City. That's what they're trying to do. They are determined to stop this place from being built. Is it going to work? No, it's not going to work. And it's not a matter of whether I want it to work or not. It's not going to work. All of this is going to further the resolve of law enforcement and of government officials to make sure that this place gets built. It might get built bigger than what they had said it would be. This is not going to be stopped. There's no sympathy within the state government, right? You got some folks in Congress, and stuff saying, hey, man, this ain't cool. You got to investigate. But there's too much money in this project. And these actions are going to be used as a justification for exactly why Cop City is needed. I don't think Cop City is needed personally, but that's going to be the narrative, right? People take issues and twist it for their own agendas, right? Their own financial and political agendas, and that's what's going to happen. There's already talk now of charging some of these protesters under RICO acts, right? Because the federal government has deemed them a domestic terrorist organization, right? Even though they're not well organized, but the Defend the Forest folks are now considered by the feds a domestic terrorist organization. So we all know how RICO acts work and how they term, terrorists and terrorist organizations and criminal organizations. Like, then it becomes easy, in terms of legally with the feds. You're screwed. You're out of luck. They're looking to raise the class of the felony of the domestic terrorism charge. If they're successful in doing that, which I think they will be now, if they weren't before, they're going to be successful now, makes it where you have to serve a minimum of 30 years before you're eligible for parole on a first offense, right? Let's see. Let's see how committed anarchists are when in real life, if you get snatched up, you're getting 30 years. I don't know. We're gonna see how committed people are to their cause, man. But nonetheless, that's it. This is the Homie Hangout. Help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time. Help your community because they need you. Be mindful of the kind of help that your community needs. It might not be this, right? But you decide. All right, guys, stay tuned for the next one, huh?